The term toxic masculinity might be creating a systemic problem for boys, that, this sense of that your identity is inherently wrong in a way became really a part of the popular lexicon.
What does it mean to be a man today? That sounds like a simple question, but for a lot of men, it isn't. Be strong, but don't be intimidating. Be confident, but don't be arrogant. Take initiative, but don't overstep. Protect her, but don't be controlling. Pay the bill, but don't assume she expects you to. Open the door, but wonder if she's offended that you did. Be emotionally available, but don't become overly emotional. Be ambitious, but don't become obsessed with success. Be masculine, but be careful that your masculinity doesn't become toxic. And somewhere in the middle of all these conflicting expectations, a man is left asking, so what exactly am I supposed to be? That confusion is worth talking about, because manhood shouldn't be a performance where a man spends his entire life trying to figure out whether he's behaving correctly according to everybody else's expectations. Manhood should be something a man learns to understand, develop, discipline, and live out with character. Welcome to Evolving Manhood.
Why didn't Barbie tell me about patriarchy, which, to my understanding, is where men and horses run everything?
These days, traditional masculinity often is the butt of jokes. But research suggests this perceived shift against maleness may be taking a toll.
There's a lot of confusion and pressure and gray area, just trying to figure out what is right and what isn't.
Today, 50% of men feel society punishes them just for being male. Compared to women, men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide and at triple the risk of becoming dependent on alcohol.
I think men are lost. We don't know how to connect with people. We don't know how to ask for help.
This as men are more isolated than ever. The majority of men report suffering from loneliness. Among men under 30, an incredible 1 in 4 say they have no close friends.
This is a problem. It's an epidemic. It's something that is affecting almost every young male in some way.
So we gathered these men in their 20s to talk about the mixed messages they get about masculinity and how that impacts their mental health. Jared works in sports marketing. Nelson and Sam are students and frat brothers at the University of Southern California.
Traditionally, men are supposed to be tough. They're supposed to put on this act. They're not really supposed to show their emotions. Me and my friends, we never really talk about how we'd feel.
What about when the opposite sex? Do you feel that you have anxiety around the roles? Like if I make the first move, they're like, who do you think you are? But then they're like, why didn't you make a move?
Overthinking oh, should I pay for her coffee even though we're friends? Is it oh, should I open the door? Is it weird to offer her a ride? It's just making you second guess some things now, especially with the current climate we're in.
Do you find, though, that there's a receptive atmosphere for you? Or some men that I talk to say, I say it's hard out there, and women go, excuse me, it's been hard for us forever. You should be quiet.
Yeah, there's definitely the resistance aspect. There is just the conflicting messages from society, from our peers, from our parents. It's really hard to kind of figure out what should we be doing?
There have been warlike moves been made.
Experts say this confusion has led to a new wave of super masculine media figures.
Bring it.
Like Jocko Willink, a former Navy SEAL turned author, podcaster, and entrepreneur. Willink says traditional male qualities like being stoic, competitive, and aggressive that some label as toxic can actually be good. There's so much use of the term toxic masculinity today. Do you think that term is overused, is harmful?
If you take any of these sort of traditional masculine traits and you take them to an extreme, they are toxic. So it's good to be aggressive, but if you're overly aggressive, that becomes bad. It's good to be stoic, but if you're totally emotionless, that's bad. So I think it's very important for us as men to be balanced.
The conversation. What is toxic masculinity? That first part of the conversation gives us something important to think about. The men aren't simply saying, we want permission to behave badly. They're saying, we're trying to figure out what the rules are. And that's a very different conversation. The phrase toxic masculinity has become a part of everyday conversation, and there are behaviors associated with men that absolutely deserve to be challenged. Violence, domination, controlling behavior, emotional cruelty, entitlement, the belief that a man has to prove his worth by intimidating, degrading, or overpowering someone else. Those things aren't signs of healthy manhood. But here's where the conversation becomes complicated. Masculinity itself isn't the problem. A masculine quality can become destructive when it is taken to an unhealthy extreme. Strength can become brutality. Confidence can become arrogance. Competitiveness can become obsession. Stoicism can become emotional shutdown. Leadership can become control. Independence can become isolation. Protection can become possessiveness. And aggression, which can sometimes help a man confront difficulty, defend someone, or pursue a difficult goal, can become destructive when a man loses the ability to control it. So perhaps the better question isn't, is masculinity toxic? The better question is, what happens when masculine qualities lose balance? That's an important distinction, because we shouldn't teach men to be ashamed of strength. We should teach them how to control their strength. We shouldn't teach men that emotions make them weak. We should teach them how to manage their emotions without being controlled by them. We shouldn't teach men that competition is bad. We should teach them how to compete without losing their character. We shouldn't teach men to eliminate aggression. We should teach them how to discipline aggression and direct it towards something constructive. That's maturity.
The pressure. Men are living in a double bind. The men interviewed in the video described something that many men experience, conflicting messages. They're told to be traditional men, then they're told that traditional masculinity is outdated. They're told to make the first move, then they're told to be careful about crossing boundaries. They're told to provide, then they're told that providing shouldn't define their identity. They're told to be emotionally vulnerable, but many men still fear that vulnerability would change how they see them. They're told to ask for help, but many were raised to believe that a man should handle his problems himself. This creates what I would call the masculine double bind. A man can be criticized for being too masculine, and he can also be criticized for not being masculine enough. So he begins to second-guess himself. And when a man constantly second-guesses his identity, he becomes vulnerable to whoever is willing to tell him what a man is supposed to be. That's where things can become dangerous, because if a young man doesn't have healthy examples of masculinity around him, the internet will gladly provide some. And social media doesn't necessarily reward wisdom, it rewards the tension. The loudest voice can become the most influential voice. The most extreme version of masculinity can become the most visible version of masculinity. And a young man who is lonely, frustrated, angry, or directionless may interpret confidence as arrogance, dominance as leadership, emotional suppression as strength, and hostility as courage. But that's not strength. That's untrained strength.
To be balanced.
He says men also need more opportunities to connect with each other. That's why Jared joined a national support group called Everyman. Their retreats teach men that being vulnerable is a sign of strength.
It was an extremely powerful experience for me. I saw grown men come to tears, sharing their experiences of what it means to be a man.
Listening and hearing your inner voice, inner critic.
Sam started his own support group at USC. Called the Men's Mental Health Initiative, it gathers male students, many from frats, in a safe space where they can open up about their fears and anxieties.
After meetings, guys will come up and say, I needed this, thank you. And it just goes to show that there's so many hidden emotions that men silenced.
And this is where the conversation changes, because after spending so much time talking about what men are supposed to be, the solution presented in this second half isn't another definition of masculinity, it's connection. That's important. One of the most important parts of the video isn't actually the discussion about masculinity, it's the discussion about connection. The transcript points to significant levels of loneliness among men and highlights that many young men report having few or even no close friends. That's more than a social problem. It becomes a manhood problem, because men need other men, not crowds, not followers, not online acquaintances. Men who know them, men who can challenge them, men who can encourage them, men who can tell them when they're wrong, men who can sit beside them when life hurts, men who can celebrate their victories without competing with them, and men who can say, "Brother, you don't have to carry this by yourself." The video described men coming together in support groups and discovering that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was connection. And sometimes a man doesn't need another lecture, he needs another man sitting across from him saying, "Talk to me."
The evolution from performing manhood to developing manhood. This is where evolving manhood has to go deeper. A man shouldn't spend his life trying to prove that he's a man. He should spend his life becoming a better man. There's a difference. Performance asks, how do I look? Development asks, who am I becoming? Performance asks, do other people respect me? Development asks, am I worthy of respect? Performance asks, am I masculine enough? Development asks, am I disciplined enough to use my masculinity responsibly? That's the shift. We don't need men who are less masculine, we need men who are more mature. Men who can be strong without being cruel. Men who can be assertive without being abusive. Men who can lead without controlling. Men who can provide without believing their value is only financial. Men who can protect without possessing. Men who can love without losing themselves. Men who can be vulnerable without abandoning responsibility. Men who can say, I don't know. Men who can say, I was wrong. Men who can say, I need help. And men who can say, I am still working on myself. That's not the destruction of masculinity. That's the development of masculinity.
Practical steps. How to build healthier masculinity. 1. Define manhood for yourself. Stop allowing social media, entertainment, critics, influencers, or strangers to completely define what manhood means to you. Ask yourself, what kind of man do I want to become? Then identify the character traits that support that vision. 2. Separate strength from aggression. Strength isn't about making everybody else feel small. Real strength is having the capacity to act and the discipline to know when not to. Learn to control your temper, control your words, control your impulses, control your ego. A man who cannot control himself is not demonstrating strength. 3. Develop emotional vocabulary. If anger is the only emotion you know how to express, every problem begins to look like something that requires anger. Learn to identify what you're actually experiencing. Are you disappointed, embarrassed, rejected, afraid, lonely, overwhelmed, hurt? Naming an emotion doesn't make a man weaker, it gives him information. 4. Build male friendships. Don't wait until you're in crisis to build community. Find men you respect. Spend time together. Talk about more than sports, work, money, entertainment, and women. Ask each other real questions. How are you really doing? And be prepared to answer that question honestly yourself. 5. Learn to receive correction. A mature man doesn't need everybody to agree with him. He needs people around him who are willing to tell him the truth. Find men whose character you respect and allow them to challenge you. Correction isn't humiliation. Sometimes correction is protection. 6. Don't confuse independence with isolation. There is nothing wrong with being self-reliant, but there's a difference between I can handle this and I have to handle everything alone. You weren't designed to live without meaningful relationships. Strength includes knowing when to stand alone and when to stand with others.
Inner work. The man behind the masculine image. This is where the work gets personal. Forget what society says for a moment. Forget what social media says. Forget what your friends think. Forget what women expect. Forget what other men expect. Sit with yourself and ask, who am I when nobody is watching? Not the provider, not the protector, not the successful man, not the tough man, not the funny man, not the man everybody depends on. You. Who are you underneath the role? And then ask, what emotions have I been taught to hide? What weaknesses am I afraid to admit? Where have I confused silence with strength? Where have I confused control with leadership? Where have I allowed other people's expectations to determine my identity? And perhaps the hardest question, what kind of man am I becoming because of the pain I refuse to deal with? Because unresolved pain doesn't disappear. It often gets redirected. Sometimes it becomes anger, sometimes arrogance, sometimes emotional distance, sometimes addiction, sometimes isolation, sometimes the constant need to prove yourself. The goal isn't to become a man who never feels these things. The goal is to become a man who recognizes them, understands them, and learns how to govern himself. That's emotional fitness. That's character development. That's growth.
The challenge. This week, don't ask, am I masculine enough? Ask, am I becoming the kind of man I respect? Choose one masculine quality that you believe is important: strength, courage, discipline, leadership, competitiveness, independence, protection, ambition. Then ask yourself, how does this quality look when it's healthy? And then, what does this quality look like when I take it too far? That's where maturity begins. Because every strength needs discipline, every strength needs wisdom, and every strength needs a purpose. Maybe the answer to toxic masculinity isn't less masculinity. Maybe the answer is better masculinity. Masculinity that doesn't need to dominate to feel powerful. Masculinity that doesn't need to silence emotions to feel strong. Masculinity that doesn't need an audience to feel valuable. Masculinity that understands responsibility. Masculinity that understands restraint. Masculinity that understands compassion. Masculinity that understands brotherhood. And masculinity that understands that becoming a man isn't something you accomplish once. It's something you continue to develop. Because a man can be strong and still be gentle. He can be confident and still be humble. He can be independent and still ask for help. He can be emotionally aware and still be decisive. He can be competitive and still be gracious. He can lead without controlling. He can protect without possessing. He can be vulnerable without abandoning responsibility. The goal isn't to remove masculinity. The goal is to mature it. So don't spend your life trying to prove that you're a man. Build the character of one. This is Evolving Manhood, and the work continues.
Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Peace.